All right, let us gavel in and begin. As this hearing is fully virtual, we have to address a few housekeeping matters. For today's hearing, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participants' microphones when they are not under recognition for the purposes of eliminating inadvertent background noise. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. If I notice you have not unmuted yourself, I may ask you if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will then go ahead and unmute your microphone. I remind all members and witnesses that the 5-minute clock still applies. If there is a technology issue, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. You'll notice a clock on your screen that will show how much time is remaining. At the 1 minute remaining mark, the clock will turn to yellow. At 30 seconds remaining, I will gently tap the gavel to remind members that their time is almost expired. When your time is expired, the clock will turn red and I will begin to recognize the next member. In terms of the speaking order, we will begin with the chair and ranking member, then members present at the time the hearing is called to order will be recognized in order of seniority, and finally, members not present at the time the hearing is called to order. And at last, House rules require me to remind you that we have set up an email address to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings or markups. And that email address has been provided in advance to your staff. All right, the subcommittee will come to order. Good morning, everyone. Today, we welcome the director of the National Science Foundation, Dr. Sechuraman Panchanathan. And Dr. Panchanathan is relatively new to the National Science Foundation, having been confirmed to the director position on June 18 of 2020. Dr. Panchanathan is a computer scientist and engineer and comes to us having served as a leader in science, engineering, and education for more than 30 years. Prior to joining NSF, Dr. Panchanathan served as the executive vice president of the Arizona State University Knowledge Enterprise, where he was also chief research and innovation officer. He was also the founder and the director of the Center for Cognitive Ubiquitous Computing at ASU. In 2014, he was appointed by President Obama to the National Science Board, where he chaired the Committee on Strategy and served as a member of the External Engagement and National Science and Engineering Policy Committees. As director of NSF, Dr. Panchanathan is funding work at the frontiers of science and cultivating the next generation of STEM leaders. His efforts will be critical, not only for renewing America's global leadership, but also for rebuilding our nation's crumbling infrastructure and creating family-sustaining American jobs in communities large and small. Just as science will be a key to our recovery, so too has it been in our fight against COVID-19. I applaud NSF for the more than 1,000 COVID-19 rapid grants it has awarded to help understand, combat, and recover from this pandemic. I also want to thank all of our scientists and researchers who cracked the code of the coronavirus and developed safe and effective vaccines. Science is getting us out of this pandemic faster than anyone could imagine possible. You remember when we first got into it, they were talking, the virologists, the epidemiologists, they were saying, no one's ever done this in less than 3 or 4 years. Here we are 15 months later, and we're already looking at the light at the end of the tunnel. Fittingly, the president's discretionary request for fiscal year 2022 includes historic investments for NSF. In all, the budget proposes $10.17 billion for NSF, a 20% increase over the 2021 enacted level. I was pleased to see the proposed funding boost for research and development and plans to broaden the mission of NSF in order to accelerate the translation of basic research into new technologies in areas such as semiconductors and advanced computing, advanced communications technology, and advancements in energy and biotechnology. NSF will play a critical role in discovering and advancing new technologies, including those that will reduce emissions and create sustainable solutions. As someone who truly believes that climate change poses an existential threat to our planet, I was especially pleased to see that the President's budget proposes essential investments in climate science, clean energy, and sustainability research. The $1.2 billion for advances in climate science and clean energy related research would allow us better to understand the dynamics of the Earth's climate systems, its impacts, and how we can better better help our communities and those across the globe to plan a better future. The discretionary request also includes a 50% increase or $100 million over the fiscal year 2021 enacted levels for programs that aim to increase the participation in STEM of underrepresented groups. America has incredible talent across our country, across socioeconomic and racial lines, in urban areas, in rural areas. Too often, we have not fully utilized this talent and not given enough opportunities and inspiration to young people who need it. Such investments, which grow our domestic STEM talent pool, are long overdue. If you look at the wealth created in this country over the last couple of generations, so much of it stems from technological and scientific innovations. Companies exist now that are at the top of the Fortune 500 that did not exist a generation ago, and they're only there because of science and technology improvements. I also want to talk about the investments included in this bill in this budget for construction of and upgrades to the major NSF facilities, such as the Vera C. Rubin Observatory and the McMurdo Station. They illustrate the administration's commitment to NSF programs for science, the academic community, and the next generation of scientists, mathematicians, astronomers, and engineers across the country as they continue their important research. I am looking forward to the furtherance of innovation that will inevitably result from future scientific advancements. I am a strong supporter of NSF and its mission to promote the progress of science and prepare us for the technologies of tomorrow. So thank you once again, Dr. Panchanathan, for joining us today, and I look forward to discussing the NSF's fiscal year 2022 budget request with you. And at this point, I would like to yield to Ranking Member Adderholt for his opening statement.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be with everyone virtually this morning. And thank you for holding this important hearing with the National Science Foundation and the director. As I say, I'm glad to be here with you, even though we're virtually meeting today for the FY22 budget for the NSF with our witness, Director Panchanathan. And thank you, Dr. Panchanathan, for being here and for being able to allow us this time with you to address some of the issues that members have on their mind. We're here today at an important time in our nation's history. Of course, it goes without saying that the global pandemic has caused so much loss and suffering, but at the same time, it's illustrated the speed at which the scientific community can mobilize to discover solutions which provide adequate resources, as the chairman has pointed out. The need to mobilize this perhaps has never been greater. The United States has long been the world leader in science and also in technology investments that have transformed our lives. It has fueled our economy, and it has secured our nation as a whole. But for the last decade, we have seen a tremendous surge in similar investments from China. and that is coupled with efforts to acquire U.S. intellectual property that they're trying to do unlawfully. In many respects, technology is being used as a modern battlefield. As the National Science Board testified last year, China has now likely surpassed us in terms of total research and development expenditures. Industries of the future, such as artificial intelligence, advanced communications, and quantum information science, while already reshaping the world we live in, are still in their infancy in terms of what we actually understand. We're in a race to learn, and the stakes are high. At the same time, we see the world's climate changing, and of course, there's differences of opinion of course, what all contributes to that, but we must figure out how to mitigate and adapt to our changing world. For these reasons, Mr. Chairman, I firmly believe that the United States' ability to enhance the security and the quality of life of its citizens depends upon investing in and maintaining our nation's status as a world leader in scientific research development. Exactly how we do that is another matter. While we likely agree on the bigger goals, we may find ourselves from time to time in disagreement over the priorities and details once we're faced with limited subcommittee allocations. Nevertheless, I remain committed to working with you and the rest of our colleagues on this subcommittee to find a bipartisan path forward in the coming year. Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding the hearing. Thank you for our distinguished witness for taking the helm at the NSF, especially during this important time of our history. And Mr. Director, I look forward to your testimony, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Adderholt. And Dr. Panchanathan, you are recognized at this time for your opening remarks. I ask that you please try to keep your statement to 5 minutes, and always remember your full written statement will be included in the record. And you are recognized, Dr. Panchanathan.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairman Cartwright, Ranking Member Adderholt, and members of the subcommittee. It is truly an honor to appear before you today to discuss NSF's many amazing accomplishments and how we can accelerate innovation at speed and scale for the benefit of all Americans. I would like to start by thanking this committee for the continued support for NSF. It has enabled NSF to advance research and innovation and bring remarkable benefits to our nation. For the past 7 decades, NSF has played a leading role in building US leadership in science, engineering, and technology, and has an incredibly strong record of investing in the brightest minds with outstanding ideas. The internet, 3D printing, the economic theory of underpinning spectrum auctioning, and kidney exchanges, companies like Qualcomm, and even PCR testing, which has been critical to the fight against COVID-19, are just a few examples of the outcomes and benefits of NSF's investments. NSF also has a rich history of fostering the entrepreneurial spirit that permeates the research enterprise. I would also like to thank Congress for the funding in the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan. The pandemic has had a profound impact on the research community, especially early career researchers. NSF will invest these funds wisely, helping the most severely impacted and most vulnerable. For the first time in decades, the United States leadership in science and engineering is facing intense global competition. Other nations, especially China, are investing vast resources in basic research and industries of the future, like artificial intelligence. The United States needs to take a comprehensive approach to R&D investment that brings science, engineering, and technological innovations to market much more rapidly. Doing so requires tightly integrating curiosity-driven research and use-inspired outcomes. My leadership team and I have crafted a bold vision for the agency. First, we must advance the frontiers of science and engineering research into the future. Through strategic investments, NSF steers the frontiers of discovery and innovation and produces breakthroughs that keep the US at the forefront of global leadership. Second, we must ensure accessibility and inclusivity in STEM. There is tremendous untapped potential throughout our nation. Every demographic and socioeconomic group in every geographic region is full of talent and must be inspired and given the opportunity to participate in STEM. Finally, America must lead by our actions and our values. We will work with like-minded partners who share these values, and we must and will take the necessary steps to safeguard taxpayer investments. The foundation for this vision is partnerships. They are powerful tools to leverage resources and deliver more impactful results. NSF has a history of cultivating and fostering environments where partnerships thrive. Over the past few weeks, the administration has released the American Jobs Plan and the FY22 discretionary request. These proposals invest in research and development across the government. The proposals also include increased investments at NSF, including a $50 billion investment in a new technology directorate and a 20% increase to the NSF's budget in FY22. The budget request increases funding for fundamental R&D and will strengthen NSF's ability to champion the basic research that is critical for our future. In addition, we know there are opportunities for translational impact in all science and engineering fields that hold enormous potential benefits. The proposed directorate will be a cross-cutting platform that leverages, energizes, and rapidly brings the innovations to market. NSF will not abandon our current mission or be redundant with other mission agencies who are doing vital work. We all know we have a large gap in bringing fantastic, innovative ideas to market and society. This is our opportunity to rapidly change that. The budget request also invests in increasing the participation of underrepresented groups in science and engineering, which is exceedingly important for our nation. Advances in technologies like artificial intelligence, quantum information science, and even the technologies we cannot even conceive of will influence the global balance of power for generations. We must commit ourselves to this challenge so that we are leaping forward and ensuring that the race for global leadership is not even close. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. With the continued support of this committee and the Congress, NSF will bolster fundamental research across all fields of science and engineering and unleash rapid innovations, securing our future for generations to come. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member.
Well, thank you, Dr. Panchanathan. And we're now going to proceed to our question period. I will start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes of questions. And Doctor, I would ask that I have a few questions to cover in 5 minutes, and I'd ask you to keep that in mind when answering. Try to keep it to about a minute or so for each answer. First, the President's budget request asks for significant increases in funding and investment in America that he envisions will create millions of good jobs, rebuild our country's infrastructure, and position the United States to be a world leader and outcompete China. I think we can all agree that to be a world leader in science and engineering, we need to invest heavily in world-class, cutting-edge research infrastructure. So the first question is, how does this proposal compare to the investments being made in China and other countries to research and development and creating the technologies of the future? Do you feel this budget sets us up for success in competing internationally?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you look at the investments specifically in China, the last few years, China has been investing 4 times in terms of the growth than the United States. And they're catching up to us. And so clearly we are at a moment where it is exceedingly important that we make sure that we are investing in fundamental research as well as the translational research, both at the same time, so that we can outcompete and leap forward in terms of progressing. It is not about even being close, as I said in my remarks. It's about leapfrogging and being way ahead in terms of our innovation abilities. So to that end, Mr. Chairman, we need to commit ourselves to robust, sustained investments in R&D as called for in the President's job plan, as well as the FY22 request. I think this is an exceedingly important time. It's a very important moment for us to show that we are not going to let any other nation outcompete us. That will
very good. Now, secondly, the the request included a proposal to create a new directorate for technology, as has also been suggested in the National Science Foundation for the Future Act and the Endless Frontier Act. This new directorate would focus on applied research. Given NSF's history of supporting basic scientific research, curiosity-driven research, as you say, how do you envision incorporating this new direction with the rest of NSF's focus on basic research?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I have started articulating the vision of NSF as this DNA. One strand of the DNA is the curiosity-driven research. The other strand of the DNA is the use-inspired research. These are highly intertwined and synergistic. That's what NSF has been, and now we're going to accelerate that progress into the future. So I envision this directorate to be a horizontal that weaves through all the verticals of the other directorates so that we are leveraging what the other directorates are inventing and making possible, as well as energizing, as well as translating rapidly in partnership with industry and others, so that we might get the technologies out to the marketplace in a rapid fashion.
Very good. All right, and thirdly, a 2018 report from the National Science Board said the board's conversations underscored the genuine concern that U.S. investments in mid-scale research infrastructure are far outpaced by those of our European, Japanese, and Chinese counterparts, unquote. Now, I know that NSF has been working hard to strengthen its mid-scale programs. What I want to know is, can you tell me if mid-scale programs remain a priority for the agency and how you are working to address the need in that area?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Absolutely. Mid-scale is a top priority for our agency for the reasons that you outlined very clearly. So we are very grateful to Congress's support, including increased funding for Mid-scale 2 in the MREFC program. This is a very important funding and makes possible critical research instrumentation in the US. This is a very important time, as I was saying earlier, to advance the scientific ideas. For example, this has made possible the first of a kind X-ray facility for new science at the high magnetic field frontier at Cornell University, for example. It's just one example. So the demand is huge. We received billions in proposals to the first solicitation. So I would say, Mr. Chairman, absolutely a high priority, and we need to be investing heavily in this area.
All right, and just to finish things off, my ears aren't what they used to be, Dr. Panchanathan. Did you say that China is outspending us 4-to-1 on basic research? In the rate of increase, they are investing at the rate of 4 times higher than what we have been investing. And so that is a significant, steep climb for them. Clearly, they have been lagging behind, and they're catching up to us fast is the message that I was trying to communicate, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I'd like to yield to the ranking member, Mr. Adderholt, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Director, Dr. Director, the Deep South is culturally diverse. As you know, it's a geographic region of the United States, and historically, it has lagged behind in many economic indicators, including scientific research and development. When we think about diversity, I think geographic diversity should be included in our considerations so that families and students, professionals everywhere in the country have opportunities to participate in higher education and also in research. Included in your budget, you take the strong step of requesting a roughly 50% increase in programs that aim to increase participation from individuals who are traditionally underrepresented in science and engineering. If Congress provides the increases for these and other programs across the agency, how would this idea of geographic diversity impact your plans and to invest in the future of areas such as the Deep South, for example, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Georgia, and just the Appalachian region as a whole?
Thank you very much for asking this question again. A central pillar, when I outlined the vision, when I came into the agency, the central pillar of the 3 pillars that I outlined was about accessibility and inclusivity. having myself come from a state where I've seen firsthand that talent and ideas are everywhere. They are not limited to any geographic part of the United States, or they are all across the socioeconomic spectrum that you can think about. So I fully agree. Therefore, when I came in, I've committed myself to ensuring that we are inspiring, motivating, and making possible talent in every part of our nation, because that is exceedingly important if we want to outcompete China. The domestic talent should be unleashed at full force and full scale, and I'm deeply committed to that. So through the investments, therefore, we are going to be unleashing not only new programs, but strengthening existing programs, which have, and some of the pilots are working. And so we want to make sure that we are going to have the diversity that you pointed out rightly across the geography as well as socioeconomic demographic be livened up. And so that prosperity is everywhere. Prosperity everywhere will only guarantee prosperity of our nation and competitiveness of the nation.
Thank you. And when you say that diversity across, I mean, obviously the Deep South would be included in that, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I'll give you one example if it is helpful. We launched AI institutes last fall. And the 7 AI institutes, when I came in, I said, the AI institutes concept is going to be called AI in every state, because every state should be energized and be leveraged in terms of the AI capacities. So AI in every state, we have 20 states covered with the first 7 institutes. We now have 8 more institutes coming up. And I expect that soon we'll have every part of the region, including the Great South, to be partners in terms of evolving this unbelievable ecosystem of prosperity through technologies like AI being enabled.
Speaking of artificial intelligence, the previous administration proposed a significant increase in the National Science Foundation's investment in artificial intelligence for the current fiscal year. And Congress provided the agency with the flexibility and the authority to invest up to the requested level of $830 million. My question is, how does the NSF plan to invest in artificial intelligence in the current fiscal year, FY21, under the new administration? And if it is less than $830 million the agency proposed and Congress authorized, where is NSF choosing to spend the difference in this amount?
So basically what I can tell you is AI investments remain very robust in the agency. And what I would like to point out is, being a computer scientist myself, and AI is my field of expertise, I can tell you with certainty that AI investments are not only in certain directorates that you would think, like computer information sciences and engineering, or in engineering, but almost in every directorate, because AI has the potential for not only advancing the fundamental part of AI, but also the application of AI. We have partnered with USDA, NIFA, we have partnered with the Department of Transportation, we have partnered with the Department of Homeland Security, and you'll be very happy to know that I have leveraged this by accessing more capital from outside through partnerships. The combination of Amazon, Accenture, Intel, and Google have invested $20 million now. We have attracted that investment to augment the AI investments. So I can tell you that the AI investments are very robust in the agency. And if you look at the companion technologies that makes AI possible, that's a very, very significant investment portfolio in the agency. And so we are not by any means walking away from the AI focus in the agency, I can assure you that.
And you are planning to spend that $830 million as currently proposed.
So as I was saying, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I'm happy to share that with you, offline. Happy to share that with you, but I can tell you that because we are looking at every parts of what AI's influence is in terms of how we are looking at the technology advancements and the impact of the technology, we are looking at it in the broad-based way in which NSF is investing, and we'll be happy to share the data with you.
Okay, that would be helpful. And just in closing, how does the National Science Foundation plan to invest in the coming fiscal year? And of course, you mentioned that it's going to be all over, but do you plan to really closely follow the recent recommendations of the National Security Commission on artificial intelligence?
So we are definitely participating and closely watching and monitoring the NSAI recommendations. And these are, as you know, recommendations that much of which we should really share, because we have been part of some of those dialogue and and also contributing to some of these ideas and thoughts that are coming out of the NSC AI. So I can tell you that we are very synchronized with NSC AI in terms of how we are looking at what AI can do for the future, including the concepts of how we might address the technological progress, the application domain, as well as issues such as privacy, security, ethics, as well as what we might do in terms of implicit bias and other recommendations that are coming out. So clearly we'll be tracking that very closely and seeing what we can do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Adderholt. At this point, the chair recognizes Congresswoman Grace Meng from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Panchanathan, for being here and for all your work. I had a question in general about more support for early grantees. President Biden unveiled the contours of his budget last week, requesting $10.2 billion for NSF, a 20% increase from last year's funding level. I think this is great and will help maintain US's scientific leadership globally. Last year, the National Science Board released its Vision 2030 report, including recommendations to increase the attractiveness of conducting academic research in the US, such as increased investment to fund a higher percentage of highly rated proposals. I've heard from scientists that there's just not enough early career funding programs to keep those interested in pursuing STEM careers. Oftentimes, those early STEM researchers have great ideas and proposals, but don't have funding to pursue their agenda. So we often lose them to the private sector or altogether. Can you discuss how a 20% budget increase would help NSF fund more earlier career applicants?
Representative Meng, thank you for the question. I can tell you that, while I cannot talk to the details right now because details will come out as the president releases the budget, but I can give you enough information in terms of how important early career researchers are to the scientific community, to academia, as you rightly point out, and to NSF. And so one of the things that we are doing is as you know, our career awards are like the pinnacle of success for a young career investigator. So one of the things that we have done, even in the COVID situation, as you know, the COVID situation has had tremendous impact at so many levels. And let's pick the early career investigators who have just joined academia and are having a lot of difficulty in terms of making sure that their ideas are going to be funded and then fostered as they move into the future. So thanks to Congress for the $600 million allocation that we got. And even before that, we prioritized at NSF to make sure that early career investigators are not put to any hardship in terms of taking their ideas and advancing their ideas so that they might be successful into the future. So our fundamental concept here is to see that we have to build the bedrock or the foundation of what NSF is. That is early career investigators. Only then you can build the future on this bedrock or the foundation. So we are constantly seeing how we might increase the attention to early career investigator ideas and see how we might therefore also support them in times of difficulties like what we are facing in COVID right now. And also to make sure that we are looking at disproportionately affected individuals and disproportionately affected institutions. This is something that we are keeping a close track on because some are more affected than others. And we are making sure that those folks get the support that is necessary to advance their ideas.
Thank you. I had another question about President Biden's action to combat anti-Asian American hate in our country. NSF was included in President Biden's order recently, highlighting its critical research to prevent and address bias and xenophobia against Asian American communities. The announcement mentioned that NSF is currently supporting more than 100 grants across the country, totaling more than 33 million in investments. These projects will help us reduce the frequency and severity of these violent attacks against Asian Americans. How can this subcommittee be helpful in supporting the president's initiatives through NSF? And as these projects are being completed, how is NSF helping the researchers spread their work publicly to help us combat hate?
Thank you again. You're absolutely correct. So NSF is putting an intense focus in understanding the fundamentals of this problem, as well as tackling this problem head on in terms of how we might be of support to the scientific community that has these ideas that helps mitigate such challenges through education, through other kinds of mechanisms by which we can demonstrate that we are taking care of the vulnerable. And this is, broad portfolio of things that we look at in terms of addressing racial inequity. And this is something that has clearly drawn the attention of NSF, and we have put a lot of effort and emphasis on this, Representative Meng, and I'm happy to share the details with you. I know that in the short time that we have, I may not be able to give you all the details, but we have the complete compilation of the projects that you talked about. These projects, investing over 33 million, as you rightly point out, these projects really address the core problem, and also what we might do to systemically, avoid this in the future or mitigate this in the future, and what we might do to further be of help. So we'll most certainly, and thank you for the offer, we'll most certainly come to the committee, and you're always very helpful, and we appreciate that. We are grateful for that, and we will come to you for specific things that we might need in the future. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Doctor. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Meng. At this point, the chair recognizes our friend from Mississippi, Representative Stephen Palazzo.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Adderholt. Director Panchanathan, thank you for being here today. I'm happy to see that the NSF is building the research vessel Gilbert R. Mason, which will be operated by the Gulf Caribbean Oceanographic Consortium, led by my alma mater, the University of Southern Mississippi, and the Louisiana University's Marine Consortium. The entire Mississippi Gulf Coast community looks forward to the Gilbert Mason coming online. I would also like to make an open-ended comment to you, Director, regarding NSF vessels and shipbuilding. I am a huge supporter of not only the Jones Act, but of American-made shipbuilding. When NSF considers contracts for barges like the current proposal for McMurdo Station and equipment, I just want to strongly encourage you to require that these things be built in the United States per the Buy American Act. Now, switching over, the EPSCoR program has been instrumental in building infrastructure within Mississippi's research universities that has enabled scientific competitiveness, increased Mississippi's pipeline of science, engineering, and mathematics talent, and attracted external scientific expertise to Mississippi. One excellent example is the University of Southern Mississippi Center for Optoelectronic Materials and Devices. So my question, with the new administration, do you see any degradation in support for this program?
Representative Palazzo, I can tell you, thank you for the question. As I was saying earlier, ideas and talent are all across our great nation. And NSF's responsibility, as I see it, is to energize those ideas and talent so that our nation will be competitive in every form. And this is the time to be competitive. And I don't see slowing down in that. In fact, I see intensification of the work that we need to do in every part of our nation, in all aspects of science and engineering. So I can only say, Representative Palazzo, not knowing specific details of the project that you talk about, I'm happy to go back and look into that in greater detail. I know that these are tremendous contributions that are being made for advancing our technological aspirations and also translating those technologies into industries of the future. So, one of the things that I've been talking about is not only to train talent, as you said, but also assemble ecosystems of prosperity, of industry and entrepreneurship around these excellent centers that you mentioned that we need to have everywhere. So I look forward to working with you in order to make sure that we unleash these amazing innovation centers everywhere.
Well, thank you, Doctor. I appreciate that. And I hope you will be committed or can commit to, as the NSF budget increases, that the EPSCoR program perhaps could proportionally increase as well, because it is a great program. Pivoting real quick, my favorite subject, China. I appreciate you mentioning that in your testimony, that we have to recognize we can no longer ignore China. They're just not a place to buy cheap, domestic or cheap goods, but they are economic peer and perhaps could be a military adversary in the future. When I first came to Congress, we had hearings and we were talking about the technological gap. 25 years, 30 years. And since then, as you mentioned, they are either our equals or they have exceeded us. And they didn't get to the top by spending. They got to the top by cheating and stealing. And now they're at the top or beyond. They're spending, as the chairman mentioned, and you mentioned, that 4 times higher than America on research and technology. So I've seen with some federal agencies over the years that they have a cavalier attitude towards protecting America's national secrets, research, and industry paid for by the American people, only to see it again improperly taken or stolen and then exported to foreign countries. So could you tell me, what is the attitude and the culture at NSF for protecting and safeguarding American technology? And are there any recent incidents to where technology may have been stolen? And if so, who was behind that?
Mr. Palazzo, at NSF, we have the fundamental research, which is, what we believe in fundamental research is that it gets enriched by the collaborative work that we do with like-minded partners across the globe. So for us, like-minded partnership who share our values, who we can trust and who really respect research integrity. There with working, so I've been developing this partnership across the globe, like UK and Ireland and Canada and others who believe in this, work together can produce even greater things. But on the other side, where we have more of the innovations that are more translating into the industrial environment or applied research, clearly there are protection mechanisms that where we fund, in universities and so on. Having come from a university where I led that particular portfolio, I can tell you that the intellectual property protection mechanisms are being put in place, and industry does protect its intellectual property. So we at NSF took this step last year, addressing this issue by creating a chief officer for research, security, strategy, and policy, who's working in collaboration with other agencies, particularly intelligence agencies, in ensuring that our policies and protocols and practices are put in place, working closely with our Office of Inspector General to make sure that we're ensuring that, these kinds of unethical practices are not, something that they can get away with. So I think we are working very hard to do that at the same time, but that is in partnership with the federal government, as you can imagine. So NSF is doing everything to see how we can have fundamental research prosper through global partnerships of like-minded partners, as well as protecting mechanisms.
Thank you, Director. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Palazzo. The chair recognizes Florida's own Charlie Crist. Representative Crist, take it away.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and Director, thank you for joining us today. It's an honor to have you. In your testimony, you highlight some of the great work that the NSF has done to help combat COVID-19, including supporting research that helps us better understand how the virus spread and technology to track the outbreaks. Can you discuss what lessons the National Science Foundation has learned over the last year in leveraging research and development during this crisis to help bring the virus under control?
Yeah. So thank you for the question. At NSF, thanks to the CARES Act investments, we had launched over 1,000 projects in a rapid scale to address this pandemic head on. But as you know, the decades of investment that NSF has made in basic biomedicine research, in engineering research, in computing research, is essentially now being contextualized so that we can find these rapid solution pathways that we're working on, understanding the virus, understanding the spreading mechanism, as well as finding solutions that can be translated rapidly so that we might address the problem at hand. So in terms of COVID-19 projects that we have funded through the CARES Act, not only the CARES Act funding directly has been applied, but NSF has invested additionally to the tune of about $200 million, unleashing these 1,000 projects in order that we might address this COVID pandemic. At the same time, we are also using, as I said, the $600 million investment that you all kindly made in NSF to see how we can help the community that is out there that is suffering because of COVID-19 impacts, the scientific community, so that the ideas that are there, and most of the scientific community being embedded in the COVID-19 pandemic, are all trying to see what they can do to contribute even more in terms of addressing this pandemic proactively rather than reactively. How might we be more resilient as a nation to these kinds of activities, not only the pandemic, to other kinds of things that you will relate to very well, Representative, as natural hazards. How might we prepare ourselves proactively rather than be reactively? And so this resilient portfolio is something that we are putting forth to NSF to see how we can address this. So I just want to make sure that we are trying to do this in a comprehensive way, so that this moment that we have taken, we have learned a lot from this moment, when we were learning a lot from this moment, including, if you want to say there is a sort of a light that is there in this that we can look up to, is that we know that remote learning is possible now with high quality. Yes, there are challenges. So how might we then use the same remote learning capacities to now include talent from across our nation, rural and urban areas? So these are kinds of things that COVID-19 is teaching us to do better, to be more resilient, to be more inclusive, and also to be more proactive rather than reactive.
Great. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm curious too, has the NSF taken the innovative steps to look at these variants that we're now experiencing? As a Floridian, we're one of the top states in variants. And I think they suspect primarily from the United Kingdom. But I'm curious if you've had the opportunity at NSF to delve into some research as to these variants, what causes them, and what we can expect in the future from them.
As you know, Representative Christ, we rely on the scientific community, which is constantly looking and innovating and finding solutions or proposing to find solutions to us. We welcome those kinds of proposals. Clearly, these are in the mix of thinking in terms of what the scientific community can and should do as we move into the future. So NSF has engagement with the scientific community, the key players in this, and therefore I would think that we are clearly tuned in, if that's what you're asking us, tuned into what is going on so that we might serve better, as I said, much more proactively, even to understand these things, how these things mutate and therefore cause increasing problems like what we're seeing today.
To follow up on that, I can't see the countdown clock, Mr. Chairman, so let me know when I'm running low, if you don't mind. And
You have
but to
1
follow
minute,
up,
Charlie.
I'm sorry.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Great. On the variants still. Now, my understanding through just reading news accounts is that the variants are more deadly and also more infectious. And so my question, I think, is twofold. Do the current vaccines have the capacity to stop them as well as they do the original COVID-19 virus? And on top of that, what should we expect in terms of other variants developing from the virus?
Yeah, this is something that I probably am not able to answer at this point in time because this is still being investigated right now. And much of this lies in the domains of the National Institute of Health, the researchers that are working really hard on this, CDC and others. So I would say that, that is exactly the thing that is being investigated is how might we find how solidly are we protected right now and how can we protect ourselves better into the future.
I appreciate that. Thank you. If there are experts within the Science Foundation, if you could forward those to the committee, that'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Christ. The chair recognizes Representative Ben Klein of Virginia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you and Ranking Member Adderholt holding today's hearing. Ensuring that America continues to lead in science and technology is critical to our continued economic success, and the United States has always been on the cutting edge of research and development. So it's vital that we continue to innovate here in America and promote policies that enable the private sector to flourish, from breakthrough discoveries at our research facilities and universities. At the same time, we must also ensure taxpayer dollars are being used effectively and transparently to maintain the trust of citizens in government-funded research. I want to thank our witness for joining us. I'm learning a lot about the NSF, the work that you do here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, many of our major universities. I've noted the request for increase in your budget from a $1.7 billion increase to $10.2 billion from its current level, which is also an all-time high, I believe. So I wanted to see how you were doing with expenditure of the taxpayers' funds. I went on your website to look at some of your audits. I commend you for the number of audits that you do. You seem to go through all of your grant recipients on a regular basis over the past several years. I did note one that I just wanted to kind of follow up on. It's an OIG report from May of last year about the vehicle fleet that you all have and how you all keep track of the vehicles that are titled at your major facilities and at grant recipients' facilities. Number of suggestions were made at the conclusion of this OIG report. And again, this was in the middle of the pandemic of May of last year. They recommended that three things: that you conduct a complete vehicle allocation methodology for all vehicles in your motor vehicle fleet. You develop internal guidance to ensure that NSF regularly establishes and documents a vehicle allocation methodology, and you complete standard operating guidance for NSF staff. Can you tell me with certainty that you have completed those 3 recommendations from the OIG and that you have a firm grasp now on your vehicle fleet and how many are in that fleet?
Mr. Klein, thank you so much for your question. I can tell you that we take this, and I take these audits very seriously. We work with the OIG in a partnership mode, and we meet with the OIG regularly, and we are always listening to their suggestions, recommendations, and we work closely in partnership with them. And we also follow up on the things that they bring up and highlight. So I can tell you that this is something that we will most certainly, you can be assured that that we track and make sure that we are taking the necessary steps from the NSF perspective. To the specific thing we talk about, I'll be happy to follow up with you on this. In terms of what we are doing and what recommendations we have taken and how we are following up, we'll be happy to do that with you and your office. So, but I can tell you that this is something that I take personally very seriously, and our OIG and I said, have a strong partnership.
Well, I appreciate that, and I was hoping you would just say yes, that an OIG report with recommendations of about a year old have been implemented. I see in FY 2017, one major facility recipient did not report 16 federally owned vehicles it purchased with award funds to the office. 16 vehicles purchased with taxpayer dollars that they didn't report. That's a good bit of funds that should have been reported. In that 2017 report, it said there were 560 vehicles purchased with award funds, 500 at major facilities. It just seems like there's some money not being kept track of within NSF, and I would think it would be a priority for you guys to get a handle on something as widespread as vehicle purchasing, so that you can come to us and say with certainty, we manage our funds well and we need that 20% increase.
Absolutely, Mr. Klein. I'll tell you right now, we manage our funds well. And yes, there are isolated incidents like this that we look at OIG's reports and immediately act on them. We don't delay action on them. I can assure you that, because that's what I meant by saying the specific partnership with OIG is to make sure that we are listening to them, we are acting on them, and we act on them right away. To the specific details, I thought that it might be best that if I follow up with you and your office and give you the details of how we have followed up. It is not that we have not followed up. We follow up on every one of them and make sure that we are acting right and that the taxpayer funds are being used most wisely and appropriately. And you can rest assured that we will never waver from that. And we are constantly seeing how we can do better.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. The chair recognizes Representative Ed Case of Hawaii.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Dr. Panchanathan. It's a pleasure to have you with us. First of all, I want to start by expressing my own appreciation to the National Science Foundation for your investments in world-class research and development in Hawaii, ranging from astronomy with the Gemini Observatory, the Daniel K. Inouye Solar Telescope, the world's most powerful solar observatory, and the potential 30-meter telescope, of course, which is the largest and most powerful telescope on the horizon anywhere in the world, which is under consideration as we speak, along with your investments in atmospheric research, oceanographic research, and other R&D, which is specific to my part of the world. So appreciate that. I do want to follow up on some of the questions that my colleagues have posed along the lines of the safety and security of our national research and development, especially, and I will say with respect to China, because the questions were raised with you as to China's investment in R&D and compare it to our own. But as I think we all can know and acknowledge and realize at this point, from China's perspective, it's a lot better for us to do the R&D and then for them to take it. As opposed to them, spending on it themselves. And they're busy doing that and have been doing it for some time. And there's no sense in anybody denying that anymore. It's a reality. And so the question to you and many of my colleagues got at this, but number one, specifically, what is the National Science Foundation doing to assure that doesn't happen? I know that you do have a series of, and have had a series of internal investigations that get at basically foreign penetration of R&D through grants. And again, singling out China as one of those foreign agents from intellectual property theft, as well as just basic counterespionage in some cases. Your numbers seem to be lower than other federal R&D organizations such as the NIH, which has been plagued in this area. But what specifically is the status of your current investigation? And just as important, do you feel that you have the resources, the raw resources, to counter this within the NSF, money-wise, personnel-wise, and otherwise?
Thank you for the question again. I just want to provide a clarification because I've heard the China numbers talked about, and I presented these numbers. The clarification that I want to present is that China is not spending 4 times the US, but the annual rate of investment growth of China's progress is 17% growth rate, annual growth rate, whereas ours is a 4% growth rate. So that's where the 4 times comes about. It is the growth rate rather than the actual expenditure. I just want
to understood, and they're probably spending 4 times at an accelerated rate of growth on taking our research and development also. So same question back to you. How are you doing? What do you need?
Yeah. So as I said, this is what we're trying to do is this balance of trying to make sure that the fundamental research is prospering, and we're also protecting what needs to be protected. As you rightly said, our taxpayer investments have to be used wisely in terms of protecting those things and not let them get away with taking those things that we should be protecting in the first place. And that is why we developed this chief officer for research security and strategy and policy. And we have also equipped that office with people, and we are constantly looking and evaluating at how many more resources will be required. But as you know, at NSF, our partnership is with the Office of Inspector General, who is a strong partner in getting this done with us. And therefore, it is not that NSF does it alone, but NSF works with the OIG to make sure that we are ensuring that what needs to be protected gets protected. But in addition to that, there is one more dimension. Since the work that we fund happens in institutions like academic institutions, we want to make sure that those institutions are also partners in ensuring that we are collectively working together in putting in place policies and procedures and practices that ensures that the protection happens, at every level. And so that's something that we're working very, very closely. Lastly, we have been working very closely, as I said, with the intelligence agencies, as well as our other counterpart agencies, and learning from each other and seeing how we might do better at NSF every day. And this is an evolving problem, as you know. It's a growing problem, as some of us see it also. So we are trying to see how we might make sure the best practices are learned from each other, put in place, but put in an ecosystem context rather than just NSF by itself.
Do you have enough resources to do what you think we need to do with your agency, with your inspector general, with the research institutions that you work with to adequately protect our R&D? Do you have enough? Just quickly, because I'm out of time.
Yeah, no, in this context, I will directly answer your question. This is why the FY22 budget increase is very, very critical. So part of the investments that we are looking at is the growth of this enterprise also in terms of the research security aspects of it. So we are going to be directing resources to ensure that we have enough resources in place for the problem that is evolving and growing, as I mentioned to you. Absolutely. We need more resources as part of the FY22 plan.
Thank you.
Well, Dr. Panchanathan, you're doing a fine job fielding all these questions, but we're not done with you yet. At this point, the chair yields to Representative Mike Garcia of California for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Panchanathan, for this testimony. This is obviously very important. A comment maybe, and you welcome to give me your feedback on it, and then a couple of questions within the 5 minutes here. So hopefully good succinct answers if you can. But I get a little leery of round numbers in these drills. When something goes up, 10% or 20%, it would be an amazing coincidence that that's actually the right number, right? Whether it's too high or too low. So I would just say that from a fidelity and resolution perspective on what this money is doing, more detail is better. More substantiation for the individual line items is appropriate. and especially given our nation's debt, my visceral reaction is I'm not a big fan of seeing federal programs go up when our nation's debt is what it's at. That's not to say that, we're targeting this budget per se, or I'm targeting it or questioning it. I think seeing the detail underneath that 20% is critical as we move forward. I know that's not the forum today for this. I will ask, though, specifically about cybersecurity. This is one of the biggest threats to our nation right now. We talked about, protecting our research from China. Those discussions we just had are a byproduct of an overarching program focused on cyber. And I'm reluctant to say cybersecurity because it's not just the defensive side of this, it's also the offensive side for multiple purposes. I don't see the word cyber or cybersecurity really too often. That's question one, is what can we do under the NSF, or what are you doing to help develop the cyber techniques and algorithms to not only protect us, but also keep us on the leading edge of capabilities in the cyber domain? The second question I have is relative to advanced manufacturing techniques relative to China especially. I don't see that in here as well. We are really dependent and entirely too dependent on China right now for things like our CNC machinery, our 4-axis, 5-axis equipment that helps our manufacturing industries build things in our country. When we need those machines, we buy them from China right now. We don't know how to build or develop those machines organically. And advanced manufacturing techniques are advancing very quickly, and I think we as a nation are being outpaced by especially China and our European peers. So cyber capabilities and advanced manufacturing capabilities, if you can touch on those relative to the directorates you have laid out in the budget you've requested.
Thank you, Representative, for the question. And first, I want to say that the investment in NSF, you can think of it as a return on investment that is hugely impacting the nation as we move forward. We have had tremendous ROI from NSF investments, and I'm happy to share that with you on a different time, because this is an investment that is well worth the taxpayers' investments for what we are being able to generate. I mean, I'll give you one small example and I move on. If you look at the Digital Libraries project in mid-1990s that we funded, the annual report of the project, Representative said, we founded Google. That was a report. And so we'd all know where Google took us. And so that's what I mean by real return on investment. There are many examples. Now let me dive into the cyber question that you asked. Cyber, being a computer scientist myself, I can tell you, the cyber technologies, the ideas, the science, and practices, all of this is influenced because of several decades of investment that NSF has been making in computing, in informatics, and other areas. So I just want to put that out there because, it is not just new. We have been working on this for a while now. Mm-hmm. Today, there is tremendous intensification on cyber-related technologies and cyber-related ideas. And there are many, many programs to name, but we have to look at, for example, one thing I would say is an interdisciplinary program on secure and trustworthy cyberspace, which is a powerful program of not only taking what we know in terms of technology, but how people behave. You will agree that the social behavioral sciences as part of the technology building is exceedingly important to us to guard ourselves, as we move into the future, because they're a very complex domain. Mm-hmm. Now, the other part that is very important, you will agree also, is we need to train people who are sensitized to cyber principles and cyber technologies and cyber ideas. And so we have got the Cyber Core program, which we have launched, and this is training the next generation of cyber professionals. And this is a service kind of a program where we fund the people and they serve a particular number of years because they have been funded through this program. So this is a fantastic program. And in partnership with industry, which I am a big believer in, we can do even better things to make sure that we're protecting ourselves. So that is a cyber response very quickly. The last thing on advanced manufacturing. Our engineering directorate has launched several advanced manufacturing programs over the decades. Today's 3D printing is what we invested in the 70s, which made additive manufacturing possible. And we are intensely focused on advanced manufacturing centers in our engineering directorate, of course, in partnership with Commerce and others, NIST and others. We are very, very committed to that area. You're absolutely correct. We need to be a lot more independent in terms of how we look at it as a nation. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate those highlights. I'm out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mike. The chair at this point recognizes Representative Dutch Rupersberger from Northern Maryland.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again, Dr. Panchanathan, and we appreciate the information that you're giving us. I want to talk to you about China, which I know Mike Gallagher's raised the issue, Palazzo has, and also as it relates to STEM competitiveness. I spent 12 years on the Intelligence Committee, and I actually do represent NSA, so I've put a lot of my focus on the issue of cybersecurity and those issues. We face a lot of threats as it relates to China. China is our strategic and economic competitor. China's President Xi has a plan to push past everyone into the next set of emerging technologies like AL, quantum space. China pushes our great engineers, and I know our quality of engineers is better, but China is right there. Now, we spend about $500 million on STEM programs to create a STEM workforce. Can you give me an assessment of how are we doing in that area? One area of concern that I have, which has been echoed by employers in my district, how do we bridge research education with the day-to-day cybersecurity matters that exist in the world today? And because there seems to be a disconnect between academia, research, and real-life execution. Now, given the shortage of cybersecurity professionals, the focus on building a pipeline of future talent starting in grade school, which is, in my opinion, very important, and the known opportunities that exist to be more inclusive of diverse, underserved populations. What opportunities or investments would NSF prioritize to address cybersecurity workforce shortages that exist today, and might also increase? We want to look at increasing the number of women and minorities in that field. Now, are we graduating enough workforce to meet the current and future needs for the government and private sector?
Thank you very much, Dr. Zupersberger. I will tell you there is, I call it the missing millions, the talent that you talk about. There is tremendous talent in our nation that needs to be brought to life, inspired, motivated all across our nation. So we need to do everything to make sure that the domestic talent is at full force, at full scale for us to compete against countries like China. We need to do a lot more than what we have been doing so far. And when you talk about the investments that we're making in STEM, it's at various levels, Representative. First, how do we motivate these K-12 students to be inspired by STEM, which means that you need teachers who are inspired by STEM, who teach them. And therefore, right there are programs at NSF which are inspiring new teachers who are much more oriented towards STEM, and that they in turn can then inspire the STEM talent in K-12. At the K-12 level, we have several programs that ensures that STEM talent and the pipeline of STEM talent is being developed at a higher level of intensity, specific to the kinds of demographic that you talk about. You know, girls, underrepresented minorities, feeling that STEM is for them as much as for anybody else. And therefore, we're doing a number of things in terms of programs addressing that. Then to the next level, these are things that I look at as pathways. Some of them may go into a community college pathway. Some of them may go into an internship program. Some of them may go into a four-year degree program or a university program. We want to have all the pathways ready for STEM talent to exercise itself. And therefore, we have the workforce that you talk about at speed and at scale. And specific to the examples that you pointed out, in your own district, for example, we have Townsend University is a national center of academic excellence in cyber operations, as one example. And that's in partnership with a number of entities. It's managed by NSA with 6 federal partners that includes NSF. And NSF Cyber Core program and the scholarship program that I talked about for service has provided Townsend with $2.5 million to prepare cybersecurity workforce of the future, as one example. And also we have, in the case of the National Cyber Watch Center at Prince George's Community College, again, an investment in terms of ensuring. So NSF is clearly identifying the problem that you're talking about, Representative, but we are acting on it. We are ensuring that we are investing in programs, not just only in research universities, but as you say, across the geography, in community colleges, in other places, to make sure the talent everywhere is nurtured to be ready for the future that you talk about.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thanks, Dutch. The chair recognizes for 5 minutes Representative Brenda Lawrence of Michigan.
Hello, Mr. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I wanted to talk to you today about diversity and the STEM workforce. Recently, President Biden announced his administrative American Jobs Plan, including an effort to invest heavily in workforce development through registered apprenticeships and strengthening the pipeline for more women and people of color and access to these opportunities. According to the U.S. Census, there has been an increase in participation in STEM fields among women. We went from 8% in 1970 to 27% in 2019. However, you know that is a far cry from the 48% that women hold in the labor workforce. Women make up more than half of the workforce in social sciences and math, but remain substantially unrepresented in engineering and computer occupations, which make up over 80% of all of the STEM fields. Can you explain to me how NSF is working to expand access to STEM careers, and what steps are you taking to ensure the participation of women in these fields? And I ask this question serving as the co-chair of the Women's Caucus and as the vice chair of the Black Caucus. And I believe strongly that in order for America to move forward, we must have all hands on deck and we must utilize all of our workforce. So I'll yield back for your response, and thank you so much for this opportunity.
Representative Lawrence, I cannot agree with you more. So, having been a computer science unit head, and this is about 20 years ago, the first thing I said is, how do we inspire more women, more girls, and more minorities to think about computing and engineering as their career pathway? And for that, I go back to the previous answer that I gave, is we need role models. We need inspiration that we need to build, and NSF is addressing this at so many levels. Let me walk through some of them. We have the NSF Advanced program, which is focused precisely on how do we get more representation, more gender diversity. We have the NSF Includes program. Through all of these programs, what we are trying to do is we are trying to ensure that we have more faculty members who are also supported, who are women, so that they become the role models for nurturing more of the talent. So high school teachers, as well as faculty members in universities, where people look up to and say, I can be that. And so we are trying to generate this set of programs that allows for these kinds of inspirations that can happen. At the same time, we're also targeting programs specifically to ensure that supplements to awards are made in order that we might then target those for including talent from a broad demographic, particularly gender diversity. So we're working hard on those programs also at NSF to make sure that we are, as you said, this growth from 8 to 27%, while it's nice to see a growth, but is nowhere near enough. And so we are actively looking at how we can do more through a variety of programs. The next thing we are looking at is how might industry internships make possible people feeling more enthusiastic about wanting to look at potential career pathways for themselves. So these are ways in which we are trying to see how we can move people, of all backgrounds to be successful in a STEM career. And as I said, as I used the word pathways in the previous response, we also need to make sure that sometimes they may not necessarily enter a university right away. They may enter a community college system, and we want to make sure that the community college pathway also is seamless in terms of getting to a university pathway. So we are seeing how we might, make possible programs that energizes these kinds of pathways so that talent from all perspectives are aggregated in order that we meet the demands of our nation and the talent that our nation truly has, which has to be manifested. So we are deeply committed at NSF. I can tell you from my own personal background and experiences and watched this firsthand, I can assure you that this needs to be done with a lot more urgency. I always use this word in my vision, strengthening at speed and scale. This is the moment for us as a nation to do it for precisely the kinds of things that you're talking about, as well as the other situation that we are in, which is facing this global competition that we need to be far ahead of. I always say we should never be looking behind to check our competition. We should be so far ahead that we never have to check our competition. And that's what we need to do at this point in time.
Doctor, do you know your current statistics on the amount of women who are currently in your department or the amount of minorities?
I can tell you that it is a significant number, and I'm so pleased to say that NSF is a very, very inclusive environment. I can get you the exact numbers to you, and you will be pleased to see that the diversity in NSF, and I came into NSF, I came recently to NSF, as you know, and I looked at the diversity profile of NSF. It is really phenomenal. But I will tell you one thing. As soon as I arrived at NSF, 2 weeks later, I launched the Racial Equity Task Force. I said, I want to understand any barriers for any talent to progress through and achieve their aspirations and goals. So I'm delighted to report that our Racial Equity Task Force, led by our leader of Office of Diversity and Inclusion, Rhonda Davis, is doing an amazing job in terms of identifying potential barriers to achievement and accomplishment. And under my leadership, you can be rest assured that that will be a principal focus for me.
Thank you so much. And I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Lawrence. And the chair at this point recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Representative David Trone, for 5 minutes. You are muted, Mr. Trone.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Doctor, for all your help today. Broadband. The president in the new American Jobs Plan proposes $50 billion over 8 years for the new Directorate of Technology at the NSF. We know the key on economic development is robust, future-proofed internet infrastructure. Recently, University of Maryland, Baltimore County received a rapid grant from NSF to increase high-speed wireless. Can you speak to some of the other research investments that you've done related to broadband, internet access, NSF has supported, and also how you see NSF's role in expanding broadband infrastructure and increasing high-speed internet accessibility?
Thank you, Representative Trone. That's a very, very important point that you're making here is how do we expand access by having the infrastructure that enables the access? What we have learned from COVID, as you know, as I was mentioning earlier in my remarks, is that when you have access, then you can provide the learning opportunities for people anywhere and everywhere. You can even provide job opportunities for people anywhere and everywhere. When we talk about addressing the needs in rural areas, in urban areas, and across the geography of the nation, this is a very, very important infrastructure element. I'm pleased to report that NSF has been focused on this from a research perspective, also from the point of view of implementation perspective. Just last week, I announced the Project Overcome grants. And these are the mechanisms that we've worked with, for example, in this case, in partnership with Schmidt Futures. And we launched several projects in terms of ensuring broadband accessibility for a variety of communities that are not served as well right now. We have also been working on a partnership with industry, in a consortium partnership with industry, to a program called POWER. The POWER program is also providing rural broadband access. And we're taking templates of that, pilots, so that we might learn from that, so that we might do it all across the nation. So NSF is very, very active, not only in terms of what we are investing, but we're also trying to partner with industry, partner with other entities that are willing to co-invest with us so that we can do even more than we're able to do. Clearly, the president's budget, FY22 budget, and the increases will play a significant role, as well as the American Jobs Plan and the investments being proposed will make a big difference in terms of how we have connectivity, and therefore through connectivity that we are able to ensure equity and participation by all, and prosperity everywhere. And this is something that we are deeply committed to at NSF.
I got it. Internet, rural. We talked a minute ago. We got 9 million students in rural America, 20% of all of our kids in rural. We need that bigger STEM skilled workforce. How do we get these investments to help drive it in rural America, STEM jobs, et cetera?
So there are many initiatives on rural STEM specifically, Representative. I will tell you, for example, our Education Human Resource Directorates currently has 350 active awards in 21 programs precisely addressing rural STEM. Because I agree with you that we need the talent in rural areas to be energized and also become entrepreneurs of the future, where there is regional economic development. Not that talent goes somewhere else, but talent is right there. And so we're trying to see how, and this is another thing I'm very excited about the American Jobs Plan investment, because we want to create these innovation accelerators, innovation centers everywhere in all parts of the nation, which takes the local expertise. For example, it could be agriculture, or it could be, in the Gulf region, in the area of shipbuilding. It can be various topical areas across the nation, but we can actually build centers of excellence where jobs are created, training happens, inspiration of STEM talent happens everywhere, and therefore we can ensure a robust economy as we move forward.
Let's quickly jump to opioids. COVID and opioid deaths, devastating communities. It's all hands on deck for the opioid epidemic that's followed and been driven by COVID. NSF's Division of Behavioral and Cognitive Sciences has done a tremendous amount of work supporting research, pain management, and neuroscience of addiction. Can you share with us some of the findings of that research?
So thank you again for the question. As you rightly said, NSF supports various projects, many projects which addresses this epidemic that we are facing right now. As you said, neuroscience of addiction. We are also looking at the role of illicit supply networks in allowing access to opioids. We are looking also at projects that address the secondary effects of the opioid crisis on families. We're also looking at how the use of technology can combat the epidemic and also provide non-addictive therapies for pain, which is what gets people in trouble in the first place. So with NSF support, the work continues. The researchers are working across various directorates, including our fantastic social behavioral sciences directorate. How do you use new data science approaches that incorporates many types of data? Analytic and visualization techniques to explore the complex web of biological, behavioral, and social factors that contribute to addiction. So we're also looking at new technologies that reduce cravings, target addiction-related brain circuits, for example, and prevent opioid toxicity. And these are the kinds of things that are in development right now by funded projects from NSF. So these network science techniques are being used to track opioid supplies, informing police tactics to interrupt supply chains. So taken together, I can tell you, Representative, that I'm so pleased to tell you that NSF has got a lot more work to do and make a lot more work possible. But taken together, these activities promise to deepen our understanding of the causes, the pathways, the diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment of addiction.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, David. Dr. Panchanathan, we're going to go to a second round of questioning, and I'm going to recognize myself for another 5 minutes of questions. The first thing I want to do is I want to take up COVID-19. You've been questioned a fair amount about that. One question you haven't had is, how is the scientific research community itself handling COVID-19? Have you been monitoring how all the men and women actually doing this research are holding up?
Absolutely, Chairman. We have been closely monitoring the scientific community and seeing what the impacts are. And I can tell you, the impacts are mostly at what we call the transition points. An undergraduate student, for example, who's about to graduate, who's engaged in a research project, wanting to finish their undergraduate research project and therefore go and get a job in industry. A graduate student who's finishing their PhD program and trying to get the job in industry or in academia. An early career researcher or a postdoctoral fellow trying to get a job and then being held back because of the inability to be able to complete their work in a comprehensive way. And the early career researchers not being able to launch into their career as fast as they would normally do. And of course, the mid-career researchers and others. The entire scientific system has been affected. And so we are keeping a close track on that. And then on top of that, as you know, Chairman, it has also affected disproportionately certain researchers and certain scientists. For example, women who are caring for their families and caring for elders. And at the same time, trying to do all the things that they have to do at home, managing both their work and family responsibilities. So this has made it very, very difficult. And so we are keeping a tab on every one of those. Our program officers are talking to every individual and providing help and relief where possible. We are grateful to the $600 million investment, grateful to all of you. And that's making a huge difference.
Thank you for that. Well, Dr. Panchanathan, I must tell you that it's a particular joy of mine to chair this subcommittee because I have an abiding faith and belief in the power of American ingenuity and its ability to solve basically every major problem that we have in this country and maybe in this world. We need to power America by utilizing domestic resources in an environmentally responsible manner, finding newer, better uses for older forms of energy production, and investing in sustainable clean energy technologies to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Question is, as compared to the fiscal year 2021 investment of $850 million, how will a $1.2 billion investment for climate science impact our ability to fight climate change?
So clearly the $1.2 billion investment, and again, thanks to the President's proposal for the FY22, which is exceedingly important for us to understand. As you know, NSF has been working in the area of climate modeling and other climate science activities for several decades, climate-oriented activities. So we are now strengthening its speed and scale, as I often say, in this aspect also. So here we are trying to see how we can expand the work that we are doing under the USGCRP, as well as clean energy technology portfolios. But I want to say that it is not just limited to only that. We are also looking at climate from a comprehensive perspective. Every directorate at NSF, whether it is computing directorate, or engineering directorate, biology directorate, or geo directorate, or social behavioral sciences directorate, education human resource directorate, and mathematical physical sciences directorate, every one of them are focused on this important problem of how we can look at mitigation, adaptation, resilience, and how might we model better and be much more proactive in our responses. I will give you one example if I may. When we launched the AI institutes last year, one of the 7 AI institutes was on climate and weather at the University of Oklahoma, understanding weather, and how might we then be much more proactive rather than reactive? How much we much more sophisticated in modeling? How much we much more sophisticated in resilient efforts? So I'm very happy to say that NSF is in the frontiers of how to do this, but we're also doing it in partnership with agencies like NOAA, NASA, Department of Energy, and others. And it takes all of government approaches, to do this well. And we are very happy to be a significant part of that.
Well, Dr. Panchanathan, you mentioned climate modeling just now. And of course, climate modeling and weather forecasting can help prepare our communities for the impacts of climate change. What investments is NSF making in these fields, and how are you collaborating with other entities working in the area? And do you feel we're providing the data and information that leaders need to make informed decisions?
Absolutely. You know that our long-term support of the National Center for Atmospheric Research, NCAR, is a huge part of how do we look at modeling for mitigation purposes, okay? Modeling for understanding so that we might prepare better. And so we are working, as I said in the earlier response, in partnership with other agencies like NOAA and NASA and Department of Energy and others, so that we might be prepared, much more ready and prepared for any eventualities that happen. And we are constantly innovating. We are constantly looking at new ways of doing things, a diffusion of disciplines rather than just a disciplinary approach only. We are right now thinking about an entire Earth system modeling effort and how might we look at planetary modeling in order to be able to understand the complex efforts, complex influences much better to be able to prepare better for the future.
Thank you, Doctor. The chair recognizes Ranking Member Adderholt for another 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wanted to refer to the lessons learned from the Recovery Act of 2009. The 2009 Recovery Act stimulus package provided $3 billion infusion of funding for research at the National Science Foundation, but it later created a fiscal cliff as the level of funding was not sustained through the annual appropriations process. There is some evidence that this was more harmful than it was helpful to the research community when the stimulus actually ended, as there were suddenly far more trained researchers than there was funding. The president is now proposing $50 billion in stimulus funding for the National Science Foundation, and far more is proposed in the Endless Frontier Act. What were the lessons learned from the Recovery Act, and how do you propose ensuring that we would avoid creating another cliff if Congress were to provide another such infusion of these funds?
Thank you, Representative Holt. The way I see it is that this is not a one-year investment per se. As I understand it, is a multi-year investment. So that's the first thing that I wanted to say. But I also wanted to say that one of the central pillars of my vision, at the foundation of it, is partnerships. So when you look at development of the innovation centers that we are talking about, innovation accelerators that we are talking about, we are constantly looking at how we might partner with other agencies and industry particularly, so that we might bring resources to the table to sustain some of the programs that we are going to be starting here through these investments. And that partnership also includes local and regional governments in the future, because at the end of the day, we want to build ecosystems of prosperity in every part of the nation. So you can imagine that the economic development activities that will be spurred by the technological innovations that we will make possible, as a result of the scientific discoveries that then make the technological innovations possible, are scalable, simply because of the fact that when you see the actual return on investment, as I talked about earlier, as the return on investment starts to take shape, people will be willing to co-invest and build and scale further. So this is an all-in approach rather than just only a certain amount of resources allocated to NSF only. That NSF is always mindful that such resources will be leveraged, will be energizing basic research, as well as transformational technologically oriented research. So I can tell you that what we have today even is not anywhere near enough to what we need. Let me give you an example. Today, with the proposals that we have and the ideas that we are leaving on the cutting room floor that have been recommended as highly fundable ideas, excellent ideas that needs to be invested in, we are leaving almost 100% of those ideas. We are only funding 50% of what we receive that could be funded. So right there, a doubling of NSF budget today is going to make possible and unleash those ideas. We cannot leave those ideas behind on the chopping room floor, because that's what happens when we leave them behind. We are now inviting our competition to catch up with us. We are also inviting our competition to take advantage of those ideas that we are not investing in and try to see how they can invest in those and leap forward. So we cannot let that happen. So right here today, I can tell you, ranking member, that we need double the investments just with what we have today at NSF. Now you add on top of that what we need for these innovation accelerators, what we need for the entrepreneurial ecosystem to be flourishing, what we need to have the SBIR, STTR programs achieving the full spectrum of their potential. I can tell you a quadrupling of the funding is just barely enough to be able to take us to all the ideas being unleashed, so that we might be far ahead of the competition that I talked about. This is the time to do that. This is a very important time for us to do that. It cannot be, as you said, it should not be a cliff, but clearly the way I look at it is that it will be a sustained investment, not only because of what the federal government does, but also what we do through our partnerships in moving this forward.
Yeah, we just want to make sure that we don't get into creating a cliff like we did in years past. And so that's what I want to bring to your attention. Let me move a little bit about the foreign government talent recruitment programs. I did want to follow up on one thing. The Inspector General reported that failure to properly disclose membership in the foreign government talent recruitment programs, and there was other deliberate misconduct that could have criminal and civil ramifications. Their office has shared with us that the FBI request for help from the NSF Inspector General has increased by 1,000% in the last 6 months. Do you think this surge in this FBI activity is an indication of the problem is getting worse, and that perhaps the NSF needs to do more? Is it an indication that NSF efforts are working and helping to bring more people to justice, or what do you think is going on with that?
So when you talk about the NSF efforts, as you know, as I was saying earlier, we launched this new Chief Officer for Research Security Strategy and Policy. And she's working with a team of people within NSF, but more importantly, in partnership with our OIG, and more importantly, with a partnership with the intelligence agencies, including the FBI, so that we might ensure that we are giving the due attention that it deserves in order to make sure that we're acting on things that we need to act on as an agency. But as I said earlier, more importantly, we want to make sure that the partnership with the community of where the science happens, where the people are, namely the universities and other entities, to make sure that we're able to work together in partnership to get the job done. And so that's what we're focused on intensely. I can tell you that we have a lot of intensity and intentionality here at NSF, working in partnership with OIG, the agencies, and the community.
Yeah, well, those my time is up, but I just want to mention that number is very alarming, and certainly we all, and I know you do take that very seriously. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adderholt. Mr. Case is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you again, Doctor. We talked in my earlier questions, and you've answered a number of questions on foreign attempts, especially China, to essentially get our R&D for free. And one corollary of that, unfortunate corollary, is that oftentimes many of our communities feel targeted inside this country by our discussion and concerns. And in the case of China, we have a number of Chinese American community members, scientists, who are concerned that that they have in your own internal review of potential influence by foreign governments have targeted or may have targeted their organizations or communities for special consideration. And of course, that's of great concern to all of us, that investigations be fair and balanced and not target any one community based solely on ethnicity or, for that matter, national origin. These are citizens of our country. What can you say to them as to your efforts to assure that these investigations do not go in that direction? Certainly the request from that community is for greater transparency so that there is an understanding that that is not happening. I understand that there has to be a balance in investigations between transparency and effective investigations. So it's a balance that needs to be found. Nonetheless, this concern under the current atmosphere, I think, is particularly one that we should very much be sure that we're not making the wrong moves on. So what's your response? What's your effort to assure, in particular, the Chinese American community, but it could be many other communities for that matter, based on your investigation?
Representative Case, that's a good point that you're making, and I'll tell you the word that you use, which I will reflect back, is balance. How do we balance our approach in a way that we are protecting what needs to be protected without seemingly appearing as we are targeting anybody or any particular segment of the population or investigators? At the same time, protecting what is the fundamental research which is important for the scientific community to, in fact, enrich itself. We will enrich ourselves by ensuring that we are having the right partners at the table. So we are doing everything possible. And the first thing I would say, having come from an institution where I was the officer responsible at the university for ensuring that our investigators were following the right protocols and procedures, it's education. And so we are putting a lot of emphasis on training and education so that people don't get into trouble in the first place just because of maybe ignorance or maybe because of oversight. So we want to make sure that we first understand that most people are trying to do the right thing. And therefore, we want to promote that behavior and reward the behavior, recognize the behavior, and more importantly, enable the behavior by training, education, and things of that nature. So that is something that we'll be focused on with our partners, because as I said, our partners are academia, and the work happens in academic environments and other folks which we fund to make sure that they are fully aware of the risks, but also to make sure that they are educating their people to make sure that they are not getting into practices that would get them into trouble. So we are focused on that. And writ large, not only in this situation, and even the question that Representative Meng asked, we are ensuring that every community feels safe and that their work is being rewarded and recognized, that they're being invested in for advancing our nation's prosperity, our nation's competitiveness, that we are never, shying away from doing that. And so this is a real balance. And so, this is something that I think we are working very closely, as I said, with our partners. And we're also ensuring that we are presenting our points of view to our partners so that in the balance context that we are talking about, that we are keeping these things in mind, that people don't walk away, or being exploited because of the fact that they feel alienated. And so we are trying to balance that very carefully. And to the extent that NSF is a part player in this, in trying to solve this problem and address this problem, we are trying to do the best that we can. And we are, it's an evolving threat. I can assure you that we are taking it very seriously because a number of questions have talked about this. It's an evolving threat. We are taking it seriously. We are doing it through strong partnerships, but very mindful of the fact that people don't feel alienated or singled out.
Thank you, Director. I would strongly urge your personal vigilance in this area. This is a very difficult time, especially for our Asian American community. And investigators with the best intentions can get carried away. So please watch this very carefully.
Thank you. We'll do so.
Thank you, Mr. Case. And Mr. Klein is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Panchanathan, approximately 80% of NSF research and education funds are typically awarded to colleges, universities, and academic consortia. Of the remaining funds, roughly 13% goes to private industry. Can you tell me a little bit about the trend lines on that? Is that an increasing percentage, a decreasing percentage, or fairly steady?
So basically, thank you for the question. First of all, I want Representative Klein, if I can take a moment, because you asked a question in the last iteration, we have found some answers. You said that it'll be good to get some answers. On the fleet report, on recommendation number 3 has been completed. And recommendation number 1 and 2 will be completed by September 2021.
Great,
and also,
thank you.
And also I wanted to say that we have had clean audits for several years at NSF. So I just want to make sure that you're assured that we always are focused on doing the right thing, and we will always do the right thing.
And for the record, I'll state that the OIG report did say that you were in compliance with the federal management regulation guidelines, but that they had some suggestions. So I applaud you for jumping on those and taking care of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. To answer your question, we are increasingly working on how we might translate technologies and have meaningful societal and economic impact activities. So we do this by in two ways, Representative Klein. One is what I call direct partnerships. Just in the last year, we have had probably close to tens of millions of dollars of partnership resources that our industry partners have brought or our foundation partners have brought, so that we might tackle problems together for the betterment of the nation and the advancement of the nation. So at the same time, the other partnership is what we call indirect partnerships. These are when we fund a project, for example, in academia through a center like engineering research centers. They then bring in industry resources together to have the largest impact possible. Not only the basic science, but also the translational technologies that comes out of it. So we have impact through that resources that is brought to the table. So when we talk about this increase, I can tell you that the increase is happening also because of the fact that we're able to bring new resources through indirect and direct partnerships. So I will state that first. The second thing is, that's why I'm very, very enthusiastic about the President's FY22 budget, where the Directorate of Technology is being proposed. And this will be a cross-cut initiative where it is going to leverage a lot of the technologies, the future technologies like AI, quantum, biotechnology, and others. But more importantly, it is also going to leverage the future of the industries. What do I mean by that? Let's take AI, for example. AI didn't happen magically today. AI happened because I'm a researcher in that field, I can tell you. AI has been a sustained investment by NSF and other agencies for the last 4 to 5 decades. And today it is now a rich, powerful technology that we all want to rapidly, make sure that the marketplace and society gets enriched by that technology focus. So NSF, while it is also making sure that happens at speed and scale, we are also working on technologies that are not even seen as technologies that will happen a decade or 2 decades from now. That's what we're keeping the nation ready always. That's what is unique about NSF. That's what is very, very powerful about NSF. And that's why, as an NSF director, I can say this, but I can tell you, even in my past role, this agency is really the shining light for our nation. It's the pride of our nation. It's what people outside think of us as gold standard. And so we need to invest in this like no tomorrow in order for us to be able to leapfrog and never have to look back in our competition. So I look forward to the support of the entire committee and the entire Congress, and this is what's going to make it happen. So I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. I again want to reiterate you've been in compliance as a result of most of your audits. I want to talk to you about your ability to ensure accountability within the grant recipients. So how do you engage with grant recipients to ensure that the funding is being used effectively for R&D and for its intended purposes, and just to ensure accountability within your grant recipients through your OIG?
Yeah. So first of all, we have our own, financial affairs office we call it BFA, Business and Finance Affairs Office, works very closely with the awardees, the organizations like universities and other folks that we award money, and make sure that the budget is clearly outlined and that people adhere to the spending outlined in the budget. And any deviations, if at all, has to be justified ahead of time and be approved. And so there's a very strict process that we adhere in terms of money, how money is being dispensed, because these are taxpayer funds and has to be spent very wisely. So we're very, very particular about that. And any deviations to that, which we see, and occasionally that happens, as you saw from the audit reports, we then take it very seriously and ensure that when the OIG recommends their recommendations, we are following through with that very, very clearly with our constituencies. And where appropriate, we take necessary actions to ensure that that never happens again. So we have a tight mechanism of accountability.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. Mr. Rupersberger, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you again. My question is about the NSF and quantum. I was pleased to see that the president's budget requested a huge or a proposal for a new NSF directorate to expedite technology development in areas that are critical to the U.S. competitiveness in areas like quantum and space. Now, Maryland is a global leader in quantum science. We are home to academic, federal, and industry leaders in this space, such as my alma mater, University of Maryland, the Army Research Lab, and NIST, a University of Maryland startup company called IonQ, all of which are working together to build powerful computers and develop secure communication networks. Can you provide me more details about how this new directorate will advance quantum technologies and space? For example, what kind of research partnership will it support? How will it work with other federal science agencies that support quantum technology, including the defense and intelligence agencies? And if this just quantum is enough, if we have any time, I would like to get into the issue of space too. But if you could handle this first, and if it's within my time, I'd like to hear your points on that issue.
Thank you, Representative. You are absolutely correct. Quantum is one of the future technologies that we need to ensure that we're doing everything to strengthen its speed and scale. So the technology directorate that we're talking about is a horizontal, and that horizontal essentially works with all the verticals. So much of the quantum work happens in our mathematical physical sciences directorate, in the engineering directorate, as well as in our computing information sciences and engineering directorate, and others too. But these three are the predominant directorates where quantum work happens. So we are ensuring that these quantum ideas that are being worked out in the labs, in academic labs and other places are energized and leveraged so that the technology directorate can quickly invest and see how we can rapidly bring them to market. At the same time, we're also looking at what needs to be done in quantum in basic research terms so that we might be prepared for the technologies of tomorrow through quantum computing efforts. And then to your point that you made, this has to be in partnership with also fellow agencies who are also working on this imperative. Namely, our Quantum Institute's launch last year was done in partnership with the Department of Energy. So we are looking at every partnership possibility. So I will tell you, when I took over as the director in July of last year, the first 2 or 3 weeks, I reached out to every agency leader and I told them, how can we partner together? Because I always believe 1 + 1 is not 2, but 1 + 1 is 3 or more. And therefore, let us work together around grand challenge problems. And quantum was one of them. AI was the other. And so we are looking at all these problems, and space you mentioned. And space, we signed a memorandum of understanding with NASA so that we might do even more work with NASA, because there's a lot of synergy of purpose here, but we also have uniqueness that we all bring to the table. And that's why bringing our assets together can be exceedingly valuable. And I can assure you that this technology directorate is going to have partnership as its DNA, expressed even more strongly than what NSF has been doing in the past.
And I like that answer. Could you also just explain, from your point of view, that's not classified, why quantum is so important that we do better than China and Russia and our other countries like them?
So the speed at which we are able to sense, the speed at which we are able to process, the low energy consumption of quantum technologies and more makes it an elegant technology for scaling into the future. We already have, as you know, a representative in our handheld devices, billions and trillions of devices, transistors that are sitting there, consuming a lot of power. But then the speed of computing, there is the Moore's law. I don't want to go into the technical details being a computer scientist. I'm afraid that I will do that. So the Moore's law has limits to what can be done with semiconductor technology. So quantum takes it to the next level in terms of how fast we can compute, how efficiently we can compute, how effectively we can compute. As just one example, same thing with sensing and others. So this is why quantum is a very rich technology paradigm. And that's why so much focus is there in quantum.
You're back.
Thanks, Dutch. The chair recognizes Mr. Garcia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you, Doctor, for the excellent testimony. You mentioned the establishment of the new directorate, Leadership and Emerging Technologies. You briefly touched on the organizational overlay, I think going effectively horizontal across multiple vertical orgs. Have you been able to, that's a good org chart in construct, but have you been able to liaise with other organizations? You talk about emulating DARPA, but have you reached out to get sort of lessons learned either from DARPA or, Rapid Capability Office within the Air Force to figure out from a contracting, dispersing money to setting requirements early, and getting, effectively the sell-off of whatever your desired project is delivered on time to wash in, the best practices and techniques for what you're trying to accomplish. And if you can, kind of just walk us through how you envision this new directorate to, beyond just the organizational construct, to actually engage with the other verticals within your organization.
Yeah. Thank you, Representative Garcia, for the question. So you're absolutely correct about the fact that we need to be nimble. We need to be able to translate things very rapidly, for which we need the ability to find constructs and processes that enable us to do that. So you pointed out to DARPA. I've talked to DARPA leadership, and they're going to be engaging with DARPA clearly to understand the best practices in DARPA. Likewise with Air Force, we have a sustained partnership with Air Force. We signed an MOU with Air Force. We do a lot of projects with them, so we're going to be working with Air Force. Energy. Last week, I had the privilege of talking to Secretary Granholm. I sent a note to her saying that I would very much welcome the opportunity of talking to her. I've extended a similar invitation to our Secretary of Commerce. I believe that these partnerships and understanding of how things work in commerce, how things work in energy, how things work in NASA, how things work in DOE, and how things work in other agencies, DARPA and DOD and Air Force, is exceedingly important. So as we are thinking about the horizontals, we don't want to recreate something. We want to learn, but adapt. Because it is not just taking that and putting it here, but what does it make to contextualize it to what NSF is trying to achieve here? At the same time, we are also working with communities, specifically industry. In the COVID season right now, what I do is I have many listening sessions with industry partners, right? In the Bay Area, for example, I've had many industry conversations with industry leaders. So I swing my chair from here to there. I go from the Bay Area to Maine and down to Louisiana, talking to people and asking them, what if NSF can have the industry partnerships at a higher level of intensity and a higher speed of translation, to learn from industry what those choke points are. Good. And talking to academic partners, what are the choke points? Because we want to make sure as we are constructing this horizontal and leveraging the verticals and energizing the verticals, that we are ensuring that this nimble agency that this has to be is realized in its fullest form. And so I can assure you that's how we are moving forward with this.
Great. I love the concept. I think, if done correctly, the 10.2 billion can behave like 20 billion. I have a mantra that's, speed is life, especially in the STEM world and Moore's law, that you just described. We've got to accelerate these timelines. The figure you have in your material you provided, I think it's called Figure 11, which shows our investments relative to other nations, specifically China, in absolute dollars. The last data point on this chart is from 2017, and we only had about a $50 billion delta between us and China. And there, as you suggested in your opening comments, their rate over rate change is more significant than ours. And I think the reality is if we were to snap the line today and look at the data, they probably are already spending more than we are in absolute terms. They are bringing to bear an entire nation to their agenda at the expense of their people. So I applaud you for standing up this new directorate and looking forward to seeing how this new directorate can actually provide velocity and be a force multiplier to your budgets, which maybe should be higher, but we can't afford it to be higher, so we need it to be more efficient. So thank you for your testimony today, Doctor.
Thank you, Representative Garcia. Thank you for all your support.
Thanks, Mike. And now for our final questioner, Dr. Panchanathan, Representative Charlie Crist.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. And Director, thank you again for your being with us so long. In November, the Institute of International Education released its fall 2020 International Student Enrollment Snapshot, which surveyed over 700 colleges and universities. And according to this survey, the total number of international students enrolled at United States colleges and universities fell by 16% in the fall of 2020, with a 43% drop in new student enrollments. Regardless of the reasons for the decline, can you discuss the value of international students to the U.S. research enterprise?
So I can describe the value by a show and tell. I'm standing in front of you, a global talent that is very, very grateful. I am indeed, I cannot express my gratitude, better than, I don't know, I won't have words to express this. I tell you, I'm so grateful in every part of my body. My sense of gratitude, just exudes, okay? I came to do this job at NSF because of the gratitude that I have for this amazing nation that gave me amazing opportunities and this fabric of meritocracy that permeates everything that we do in this great nation. I am so grateful. I hope I've said it enough. And so I can tell you that therefore—
I feel it. I'm grateful too, if I may.
Yes.
My grandfather immigrated from Greece. My grandmother immigrated from Lebanon, and they're on my father's side. And on my mother's side, it was Britain, Switzerland, and Ireland. And so I'm enormously grateful as well to America, as are you. And I have a dear friend.
And that's what makes us a great nation. That's what makes us this great nation that we are. And therefore, to answer your question, Representative, we should be welcoming global talent like no tomorrow. Let me be very clear about this. I've said this in many, many ways. I said that accessibility and inclusivity is exceedingly important for our nation at this very important time. We need to find talent across the socioeconomic, demographic, and the geographical diversity of the nation. We need domestic talent unleashed at full force and full scale. For far too long, global talent has been substitutive to domestic talent. That is not an acceptable future for our nation. What we need is global talent additive, augmentative to domestic talent, that both domestic talent and global talent should be unleashed at its full force and full scale. Because when we are competing against countries, when you talk about China, it's 1.2 billion people in China. But we are a nimble nation, an entrepreneurial nation, an innovative nation. Therefore, we need the talent on both fronts to compete ahead and be ahead of nations like China. So we need domestic talent unleashed at full force, full scale, global talent welcomed at full force, full scale. The combination of that will place us in the vanguard of prosperity and global competitiveness, and we will be far ahead. We will win this race always if we have that mindset of inclusion of talent, because the talent will express itself, because this fabric of democracy, this fabric of meritocracy will no doubt ensure that there will be hundreds of thousands of people or millions of people like you and me, which will continue to make this nation great into the future.
I couldn't agree with you more. We are the melting pot of the world, and my Florida is the melting pot of the nation. We're pretty diverse. Mr. Chairman, I'm done. And thank you so much for setting up this hearing. And Director, thank you for being with us today. It's been an honor to be with you.
Honor is mine too.
Thank you, Congressman Crist. And I congratulate you on bringing Dr. Panchanathan.
You're muted, Chairman.
I congratulate you, Charlie, on bringing Dr. Panchanathan out of his shell to express his patriotism, and you as well. And Dr. Panchanathan, you've only been at NSF for a short time, but it's pretty clear that you have hit the ground running. I thank you for appearing here today. You've been an impressive witness. You've fielded our questions, but you're not done yet because we may be sending you more questions via email. In fact, I'm sure we will be. So we'll be grateful to you for continuing to field those questions as part of this hearing. And I'm going to bring this hearing to a formal close. Let's see here. Again, for the members, House rules require me to remind you that we have set up an email address to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing. And we have secured the commitment from Dr. Panchanathan to answer those questions. The email address has previously been provided to all of you and your staff. At this point, the hearing is adjourned.
Thank you very much.